For this 21-22 series of CIP talks, we are focusing on engagement and empowerment of youth voice. Through this series, you're going to hear perspectives about engagement and empowerment ranging from individual to system levels. And this series includes individuals who have experienced foster care, attorneys, judges, and some that have overlapping experiences therein. You'll hear from them perspectives on how we can more fully engage youth in those processes as they sit now, but also how we might support youth with lived experience and expertise to be engaged in leadership to build something better, more aspirational, stronger systems in the future. And with no further ado, I think I would turn it over to Nyasha and Cristal.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We've just premiered and you've just viewed Cristal Ramirez's CIP talk entitled Making Lived Experience Engagement Authentic, Intentional, and Mutually Beneficial. My name is Nyasha Justice with the Capacity Building Center for the Courts, and I have the honor of engaging in this discussion today with Cristal about her CIP talk. But before we do that, I want to let the audience know that we've set aside time at the end for your questions, so we encourage you to put questions into the chat. Cristal, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nyasha. Appreciate it.
So, Cristal, your talk was thought-provoking, and I must say you've made my job today in deciding which questions to ask a little difficult, because there were so many deep moments and thoughts that made me pause and really give thought and critical thinking to what you said. But before I get started with my questions, I wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else that you'd like the audience to consider before we begin this conversation.
I think I'll leave those thoughts for the end if we want to go into the questions first, and then we can circle back to that later.
Absolutely. So, Cristal, one thing that kept jumping out to me from your talk is you kept referencing your why. And when we talk about why and how people normally use their why, it's meant as a source of motivation, encouragement, defining their purpose. And you mentioned that it's important to be honest. Well, let's face it, that can be really difficult sometimes to be honest about what motivates you. And so what if the answer to the why on why you engage people with lived experience is simply, as you said, to check a box? Do you ever truly get to power sharing, as you mentioned, if that is your why?
I don't think you can. I think if it's just to check the box, then you're not going to be inclined to really power share in a way that's really authentic and intentional, because it is just to check the box. I feel like I've come across people who really believe in the power, the impact, and the benefit of youth engagement. And it makes such a big difference in the questions you ask, the support you provide, in the in the space that you make for others. And if you're not really providing people with lived experience the space to really shine, to really lead the work forward, then it's not really going to make as big of a difference as it can make. And so I don't think that unless people's whys get to because they believe in the true power and impact of youth engagement, then they're not going to be able to power share. They're not going to really get to what we really want out of authentic and intentional youth engagement.
And Cristal, you already answered my next question, which is going to be what whys really lead us to that power sharing and that mutually beneficial experience. And you just said it, that authentic and providing that space.
Yeah.
So let me go on to your who. And I loved how you divided it into the who, the why, the how. But there were two things that really struck me when you talked about the who. And you talked about who's being excluded from the platform, but you also mentioned this notion that people lived experience have to be worthy to be spotlighted and that they should be lucky. So let me first talk about who's being excluded. What's driving, or what do you think is driving this exclusion of a large number of people with lived experience from being able to share their experiences, their thoughts on how to move this system forward?
I think there's a number of things there. I think one, sometimes folks who are being excluded who might not have like as a professional as a background yet, or if they don't have a certain academic background or anything like that, they get excluded often. And I think it's because people don't view lived expertise as actual expertise. It's just kind of like a lot of words in the child welfare system, sometimes they're just fluff words. It's just lived expertise because that's something that we talk about, that we use, that we see. But I think sometimes folks are being excluded and not given the opportunities to be able to get a leg up or develop that professional develop their professional skill set. So I think there's that piece to that. I think sometimes folks who are chosen and aren't chosen are also ways for other folks to kind of control the narrative, to be able to kind of like, if I've seen it done multiple times, especially when it comes to like programs and like getting donations and stuff like that. Folks are gonna reach out to the people who are gonna say the specific experiences that they want the audience to hear, or say it in the way that they want them to hear, because some folks are a little bit more, for lack of better terms, maybe a little bit more polished or have some more experience under their belt, sometimes aren't as likely anymore to share their personal experience anymore. So when people who are being excluded from certain opportunities, they're still getting invited to share their story because they're more likely to do stuff like that. And I've just seen this in a lot of different programs, and people again are asking for donations or anything like that. So I think that's some of the things that kind of happen. And sometimes folks get selected for the feel good story, this foster youth made it, because again, I think it goes back to controlling the narrative. It depends on what folks want the audience to hear, what narrative folks want out there to really this be the deciding factor on who's going to get selected. It's not always on professional expertise or professional experience or their own merit. It's typically what folks are looking for, and they kind of like tailor it to that.
Thanks, Cristal. So how do we get past this? And I like the terminology used, controlling the narrative. Mm-hmm. What would you suggest to all of the people that have just viewed your talk and that are engaged in this work? What's the first step in making the lived experience platform more diverse and really representative of all experiences in the foster care system?
Yeah, like many other things, removing assumptions and bias, and that could be its own kind of like talk, and people can kind of reflect on how they remove their biases and assumptions that they have on people with lived experience. But I think it starts there. It starts to really some of it is also, it goes back into like other levels too. Sometimes there's not a diverse group of people with lived experience because of the, at the staff level or like agency level, it's not very diverse there either. And so like really taking a deep look into like really diversifying experiences, just all across the board. And also just, being more open-minded. Like, yes, sometimes like folks with different experiences, will have different levels of professional experience, of being more open to providing the kind of support that folks might need, so that way there can be more diverse folks, and it's not the same kind of former foster youth that are being invited, because they also, they put in the work and they want to be there, but also my peers who are also seen as maybe the golden child or the folks that kind of like have it together and made it, we also see that like other people are missing from the table, whether it's our siblings, our families, our friends, people who also deserve these kinds of opportunities, but they're not given those opportunities because they're not being poured into, to be able to get to that level of polish and professional development. So just being more open-minded to that and being aware of the supports that might need to take place. But if the supports are there, then we're able to diversify the different perspectives as we bring them in and allow space for that.
Thank you, Cristal. And so I would also add, so maybe we might have to get used to being comfortable with being uncomfortable as we absolutely diversify. Absolutely. So I want to go back to what I mentioned previously about this notion about you have to be worthy or that you should be lucky. You said something in a conversation to me previously, and you alluded to it in your talk, that doing this type of work with lived experience is hard. Do you want to speak on that when you hear people say, oh, you're lucky or you have to be worthy? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think sometimes like I've something that somebody said at a conference like more a couple of years ago that really stuck with me of like you don't have to go back to the family business, like it's okay to step out of it. But some people, some of the peers that are in like the advocacy roles that I've been a part of have shared the same sentiment of like, well, no, like if we make it and we're able to use our expertise and get these opportunities, then like it's almost like people have like a responsibility to like do the work, but the work is hard because we've seen it firsthand how it does impact, whether it's us, again, our brothers or sisters, our families. And so we just carry the weight of it differently. I work with a few people with lived experience on, and we've worked on a couple of projects recently, and they, you know, they've mentioned like they carry the weight of like we have to get this right, like this isn't just a, oh, we're gonna try this and then shoot for the stars, but like it's okay if we don't land there. It's like, no, like we're gonna shoot for the stars and we better get there because like we have a responsibility to really do that, because they understand the level of impact that it can make or the harm that it could have if like if the work isn't done right, or if the work is it's taking too long, because we've experienced it firsthand that like, oh, when things take too long, like people, you know, there's a lot of people fall into the cracks or like don't get the opportunities or the supports that are needed. And so I think once you like live something firsthand, you really get to understand like what the costs and what the benefits are. And so I think that that just like weighs heavily. And I think for like a lot of professions just in general, right, like sometimes it gets hard to like separate like work from life, because like, oh, your work is like it does, excuse me, my my throat just got a little tickle in it. But I think that sometimes like folks aren't able to like always separate that, because you could be, for example, my age and still have siblings in the foster care system, or you can, you know, just see it play out differently. And so yeah, I think sometimes it's just like a lot harder for folks, and people feel it a lot more deeply, and there's a lot of like burnout sometimes. And then there's also the other level of like, recently I've heard some folks with lived experience discuss like, maybe I don't want to work in the child welfare system anymore because I'm not taken seriously and this work is really really hard, and I'm trying to not only carry the weight of the work and like how, you know, like how sometimes, I don't know, for lack of better terms, and how burdensome it can be, but also like having to navigate people taking me seriously and getting opportunities to grow and move forward and stuff like that. So those are all things that in some form either I have felt or I have like discussed with other, you know, amongst my peers, like of how it is sometimes to work as a professional or as an advocate in the child welfare system when you have lived experience.
Thank you. I mean, that's a lot to be mindful of, and it's a worthwhile, but thank you for reminding us that it's also a heavy burden to bear when doing this work. You said something in your talk. You said that a stipend and a hand clap isn't enough. So that made me think, and I really paused and actually had to stop your video when you said that, and it just made me think about naturally what is enough. But I want, if you can answer that question, what is enough from a person with lived experience, and not just the ones that we normally see, as you call them, the golden child, but what's enough for this whole spectrum that we've been excluding? And then the second part to that is, how is the person or the agency that may be engaging you, how are they to know what a reasonable expectation is? So start however, what works best for you in those two questions.
Yeah, I think like a reasonable expectation. I think, well, one, like I think when I mean, I know like agencies and just in different organizations and stuff, like they hire consultants, right? And so like sometimes I'm like, oh, like, well, what about the people with experience? Like, are you treating them as such, or how does that look like, and how is that different sometimes? So some of these like breakdowns are already made up in organizations, but it's how people view lived expertise. And also like I do acknowledge like sometimes like folks are younger, and sometimes like it does equate like level of professional experience as well. So I think like, you know, being able to like take in both lived expertise, professional experience, and kind of, you know, really being able to I mean, not really discussing like numbers or anything like that, because I feel like that's its own thing, but just really being able to reflect and think about how do you think about like your staff and like how you pay them, or the consultants that people hire, or other agencies that people work with, and like their rates, or like how, you know, they're viewing them as, and them coming in to like help with, you know, different projects and stuff like that, and being able to either work with people who are already at that level, and have lived experience, or like if they don't sometimes it's not, they don't have all of the professional development skills, or excuse me, professional skills that might be needed, but how can we work them up so that they can get there? Because I do understand there's just different levels to that, but I think that's one thing to consider. And then I think I'm losing my track a little bit if I answered your first or second question, but I think I started with your second question.
You actually have answered both of them, because
Okay,
something
perfect.
interesting, and well, you may have, and if there's more, please add. But something that just struck me with what you said is that we need to acknowledge the distinction between experience
Mm-hmm.
and expertise. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a pathway to move people with lived experience to that point of expertise and the skill sets and the development that, as you said, we should definitely be offering in terms of what is enough. And I think that was the second question: what is enough across that gamut of lived experience?
Mm-hmm.
So, Cristal, I wanted to ask you about this one size fits all approach,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, because I don't want people to go away from your talk. And I think as we value this whole wide array, and as we move toward more inclusive and inclusive field of having people with lived experience, is there really a one size fits all approach? Everyone's not going to want to have the same level of engagement and be at that meta level. So what do you say to that?
Yeah,
How?
absolutely. Yeah, I think, well, one, I think at the end, one of the things I mentioned was, these are some of the things that I've learned about engagement. This is what I find important or what I find valuable, and both for me and the network of people that I've talked with, but it's also important to like talk to the people that you are engaging, and getting that information from them and starting there. But I think, as the first thing I thought of when you said different levels of engagement is that, making it very clear what kind of level of engagement it is, at the beginning, just being very clear about, you know, what the expectations are if folks are agreeing to, you know, be engaged in a project, or how long is it going to be? Is it going to be a couple of phone calls for 2 months, or is it going to be a year long where they might get a call on a Monday in October and then not hear again? You know, like how is that going to look like, so that folks know what exactly they're signing up for, what they're engaging in? Because not everybody with lived experience does this as, you know, their full-time everyday job, but they like to, you know, do advocacy work on top of like what else they do. So just making sure that folks are aware of, you know, what that looks like. And I think it's totally more than okay to have different levels of engagement, and for, I think, different people with different levels of experience professionally, and also just their lived experience, like might want different things out of engagement. And that goes back to kind of a point I said earlier of like, you don't have to go back to the family business. Like not every person with lived experience wants to do this as a full-time position or anything like that, wants to constantly be engaged with the child welfare system. So that level of engagement can look differently with other people. And then in terms of support systems and services and all of that good stuff and professional development, some folks have, you know, more years or more tools or more skills or, you know, things like that. And so it's just important to have conversations with folks of meeting them where they're at, and asking what, you know, what it looks like with them when you're thinking about putting supports and services into place. Like one, it's important to already engage people with lived experience of what that looks like. And then after, once that gets put into place, actually check in with the people that you're supporting and providing services to directly, because they're going to be able to help shift it. It's not a one size fits all. It's something that constantly moves and constantly changes, because people are constantly moving and constantly changing. The time, you know, that's what it does, right? So we just have to make sure that we're having continuous conversations with people, and being you know, comfortable with the uncomfortable, and being willing to shift and keep moving, because that's how the work will get done, and that's how we'll keep improving.
Thank you, Cristal. At this time, if there are any questions from participants, I'm looking in the chat. please feel free to type them in now. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but it doesn't mean that anyone isn't typing them in. If anyone's like me, I'm a slow pecker. Did not learn how to type. They did not offer that, Cristal, in my high school. But while we're waiting to see if any questions come up, I did want to give you an opportunity. What words do you want to leave this audience with when it comes to making lived experience authentic, intentional, and mutually beneficial?
What words do I want to? I think like I mentioned a lot of times in the why and how we discussed earlier, just be really honest with yourself about your why. And if you're really honest with yourself and you're okay with your why, then move forward and go on and follow, maybe some of the tips that I shared and discussing with people, what does that mean to them? But maybe starting there. But if your why is just a checkbox right now, and it's just like, okay, well, this is what the field is doing. Everyone's doing it, so I'm doing it too. Like sometimes that's where you start. And I think that that's okay, but being open about, maybe shifting that for yourself and really trying to figure out like, what is it about lived experience experts or people with lived experience like that I might not see or might not deem as like, oh, this is going to be impactful or beneficial. Just taking some time to reflect on that so that your why can get to people, engaging people with lived experience is impactful, is powerful, is beneficial, does make a big difference, and can really move this forward. But if your why is already, yes, it's great, and this is why I do it, just continue to be open about, the people that you're working with, know that, times continue to change, people continue to change, and to be able to continue improving and moving forward, we just need to be okay with all the shifts that come with working with new people and being open-minded about their relationships. So it's just, something that continues to shift and improve as we just continue to work together. So I think that's what I think about authentic and intentional engagement. And a lot of I think the words authentic and intentional, I think that takes a lot of pausing. It takes a lot of reflection and pausing and just really being honest with yourself, with your team, with others about where you're at so that we can all move forward. Because if we don't pause, reflect, and are honest with ourselves, then we're not really gonna provide ourselves the space to be able to grow and to be able to more authentically and intentionally engage people with the experience.
Absolutely, Cristal. What a wonderful way to end our discussion. I do want to bring attention to the tip sheet that Cristal provided us on youth engagement. I encourage you, it's been placed into the chat. You also have it on the website. Thank you so much for joining us today. I encourage you to go back and to review Cristal's talk as many times. We've got a comment. Let me see if there's a question. So from Jen Rennie, so I was right with Nyasa, struck by your comments that a stipend and a thank you is not enough. You talked about youth needing a title, other ways to empower them. I'm worried about all youth with lived experience, including those hundreds of thousands out there. Absolutely. You all, our next talk is November 1st with Judge Martinez Jones. We look forward to seeing you again. Cristal, thanks so much for your talk and for spending time with us today during this discussion. Have a good afternoon, everyone.